If you've seen any of my videos, you know what my feelings are, or at least my opinion is, on what a true MMO should be, which is just a persistent world where the focus is on the player and the player's freedom to become immersed in that world. Now, my opinion hasn't changed on whether or not Guild Wars 2 is a true MMO. However, Guild Wars 2 offers a lot of that freedom in a theme park setting where you are still guided along your path, but everything's a horizontal progression. So you choose where you want to go, what you want to do, what your focus is every time you log on. And there's a couple areas where I think Guild Wars 2 really shines above all of its competition. And those areas are the reasons that I can't stop playing Guild Wars 2. So before we get started, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button, and it really helps my channel out. So let's go ahead and get started on why I was wrong about Guild Wars 2. I made a video a couple months back that talked about how World of Warcraft could fix its PvP system to draw players in, and I compared it to Final Fantasy XIV. This was wrong, and I'm sorry. I should have compared it to Guild Wars 2, because I think Guild Wars 2 hits everything I want out of a PvP game. What I mean by that is that Guild Wars 2 focuses on the simplicity of PvP, easy to understand, while also having that depth in every ability packed into one. In that video where I compared Final Fantasy XIV, I talked about how it combined a lot of abilities into a single button press so that you don't lose that class fantasy, but you're still getting a good idea of what to do in each situation.
Let's talk about the things I like. The smaller amount of buttons, because it basically combos it all for you. And then you also have the unique conditionals, like if I do this, then this changes.
And you see this a lot in fighting games recently, where they are trying to make inputs a lot simpler so that you could hop in and not have to think about how to press an input or how to do an ability, but rather you just do it. This gives you a lot of that predictive gameplay where you are trying to read your opponent and using abilities at the right time to outplay that opponent. And Guild Wars 2 takes that concept and applies it to every class in its game. While it does have some simpler classes and also more complex classes, the gist of what Guild Wars 2 does is gives you 10 abilities and says, go figure out how to play your class. And what's great about this system is while you might not know the intricacies of each ability, within 2 to 3 matches, you're able to really pick up on how the class plays and how to use your abilities in certain situations. Meaning that when you class swap, there isn't a huge learning curve as far as how that class plays. Whereas when you look at something like World of Warcraft, where every class has 60 abilities and then each spec also has its own set of abilities and playstyle, you're now memorizing 600 abilities versus 10 to 20 abilities. Now, with that simplicity, there's also a really great mechanic that Guild Wars 2 applies, especially if you're looking for that free-to-play MMO where you could just jump in and do arenas or instance PvP content, is that you only ever have to get to level 5 to enter the mists, where you can then set up your PvP build and have full access to all of the builds in the game, whether you have the expansion or not for that particular build. Which means you can have 5 characters that you can swap around and play multiple specs for each character, depending on what you're feeling like at the time or depending on what your friends are playing at the time, which gives you a lot more freedom to be able to jump in and have fun. Add to that with the simplicity of the mechanics is that you don't feel like you're falling too far behind by switching classes. While I always do advise to specialize in one class and one spec, you're able to jump in and just have fun with any class, any spec within 2 to 3 matches and learning your character or your class and learning what the multitude of other classes do and being able to play against it. While this does make the game feel a lot smaller, since all you're doing is creating a character, getting to level 5, jumping into PvP and instancing into PvP combat or arenas, it does give you that option for those people who like how World of Warcraft does their PvP queuing system, or how Final Fantasy does its PvP queuing system, or how most MMOs these days do its PvP queuing system without the tedious PvE grind. So you don't have to play aspects of this game that you don't want to play. You could just jump in and do what you love doing, and that's playing against other players. And this is great, especially when you're playing on the free-to-play Steam model of the game. I know that when I played World of Warcraft, I absolutely hated leveling up multiple toons because I just wanted to do PvP, and Guild Wars 2 circumvents that. Guild Wars 2 respects your time in that way. Now, with simplicity out of the way, there is a lot of complexity to how you play your character and a lot of freedom to how you build your character. And even when you're jumping in, you have a lot of choices to make before you ever step into the arena. Now, we can always look up a build, or the game offers some templates for some basic builds for you to learn your character. Personally, I have used builds online to learn a class and then build off of that my own way. Once you start figuring out your class and the different talent choices that you pick from, as well as the different weapons you can use with that particular class to make a build that feels good for you when you play. For me, for instance, is I like to play my sorceress as a healer. Even though there is not a true healing class, you can put points into healing other allies and have increased healing power and turn what is normally a DPS class into an AoE healing machine. Now, this aspect of the game is where I'm having the most fun. I love to be able to just pop on and right away start getting into matches. But with the simplicity of the system and how much fun it actually is, adding into that depth and the replay value of the PvP in this game, you see a much larger community based around the PvP in this game than you do in other MMO titles. I view this system as like jumping into a League of Legends match where I'm just hopping on just to do the PvP, just to hop in and get into a match and start smashing other players' faces in. And it's incredible how much replay value is in this small package of this massive game. Now, the PvE of Guild Wars 2 is a conundrum to me. While I do think it's a lot of fun and there's a lot of options as far as what you want to do on each playthrough, the story in the base game is very campy and it doesn't really push me forward. It doesn't really push the player to keep playing because the story is just very generic. However, when you start hopping into the expansions, that's when they really step up their game in how they tell their story, and it does push you to go further and further because you want to see what happens next. You want to see what happens with these characters, who are all excellently written. I've recently completed both the Path of Fire expansion and the End of Dragons expansion, and both blew me away. End of Dragons being my favorite story so far from Guild Wars 2. They are some of the most entertaining stories that I've played in an MMO, and it's pushed heavily by how well the performances are made with each of the story characters. Story aside, Guild Wars 2 offers one of the largest open worlds that I've seen in an MMO. There is a fast travel system, but that fast travel system does not diminish the feeling of scale and the sheer size and amount of things that you can do in each of these areas. So if you're someone who is an achievement hunter or likes to explore, there's so many different things that you could do in each of these zones, whether it's platforming to collect all the visual nodes or doing all the little area quests to be a completionist and complete the entire map, or even just going out and finding all the different hero points which you can apply to your PvE build. This leads to a lot of freedom in a theme park MMO as far as what your adventure looks like. And it is a ton of fun. I have found myself many times jumping on for hours just doing platforming. And I think that more MMOs need to take this aspect from Guild Wars 2 and incorporate platforming in their games, because it's a lot of fun to just jump from a rock to another rock to another rock and then get some kind of reward at the end. It's definitely something that I know that World of Warcraft has tried to implement in Dragonflight, but they don't do it nearly as well as Guild Wars 2. Guild Wars 2 also does questing very differently than other MMOs. Each point on the map has a little heart that you have to fill up by doing various tasks in each of those sections. Versus going over and talking to an NPC with an exclamation over their head, you choose what you want to do. And that's the freedom of this game, is that everything that you do, everything you interact with is something that you are choosing to do. And each of those quest zones offer different rewards, such as karma, which allows you to buy different things from that vendor in that particular area when you complete that quest task. The big letdown is that I don't really engage with this system very much. You level up so quickly in this game that you could just do the main story and really get the full experience in the base game, get to level 80, unlock all of your talent choices up to the elite specializations, and from there you have to go and collect hero points to unlock your elite specializations. But this system of questing, while I do think it's unique and fun, and I do enjoy being able to choose what I'm doing in each area, I just don't think that offers enough reward to go out and do each of these particular events. They also offer a lot of group content in the form of public quests, where you see a giant orange circle. It's you and whoever else is in that area contributing to the success of that particular quest, which then also gives you rewards. And I do find those very fun and very unique, and gives me some kind of sense of it being an MMO, even though you don't really have to communicate with anybody in those areas. But again, if you're an achievement hunter and you're just trying to look for things to do in this game, on the PvE side, there's so much content packed into this incredibly massive world that there is no shortage of things to do. As far as the rewards go, there's a lot of things in this game that you can do that don't really offer much of a reward, and that is kind of a letdown. Now, looking at the combat, there's a lot to love here. Guild Wars 2 has a great blend of a soft tab targeting and a hard tab targeting system. While it's still just a tab targeting system, it still gives you that feeling that it's action oriented. Between dodge rolls giving you iframes and the soft targeting system, you feel like you're jumping around the battlefield and playing more of an action RPG than you do a tab targeting or a classic MMO. And that's all obviously smoke and mirrors and an illusion. It's still a tab targeting system. It's just implemented so very well. It's constant action. It's constant moving around and repositioning and jumping around massive mobs of enemies and doing some of the coolest tricks that you can do. Where this falls apart though is especially in story missions where you go up against these boss enemies and you feel like these enemies have way too much health and they've become very spongy, and you feel like you're just wailing away at these boss enemies for way too long. Now, it makes sense when you're possibly killing a god or a dragon that should have a lot of health, but when you're going from blowing up massive groups of mobs within seconds to, okay, awesome, the next 15 minutes I'm going to beat up this health bar, that doesn't feel too great. So let's get down to the meat and potatoes here. The thing that everybody wants to know is, what is the end game like? Now, there is a caveat here. While I do think that the end game is great when you learn what you're doing or how to do it, or what you need or the prerequisites to doing it, with a lot of different options as far as what you want to do in your end game, I have to say that due to how many currencies and how many vendors and how many things are going on, as well as the game not really telling you what the prerequisites are to getting into the end game, this is the most confusing end game I've ever played in any MMO. And it's caused me to quit in the past, but this time I've dedicated myself to learning how the end game works and how to play in the end game. And the first thing I want to talk about is the easiest to really understand, and that's a world versus world. And this is something that the game has been really built around as the main attraction. The world versus world is if you've ever played Elder Scrolls Online with the giant Cyrodiil in the center and everybody's fighting each other, 3 factions, and you're taking over keeps and zones, the world versus world is very much like that. It's a massive PvP battleground with hundreds of players across 3 factions battling it out to control different points of the map, whether it's a keep or a camp or even the castle in the center. A lot of times you don't know what's going on. It's just a big old clusterfuck of a fight with a lot of people zerging here and there. And then other times it pays off and there's a lot of fun to be had. Now, jumping into this, I noticed that I'm the only person running around without a mount, having to use other means of transportation. And that's because the game has the world versus world mount locked behind a skill tree and then achievements to unlock that mount. The world versus world also offers a lot of ways to upgrade your gear, from the exotic, which is the baseline gear that you would need to jump in and be competitive, to the ascended or legendary gear, which is the better or higher tiered gear. World versus world also takes into account your gear, your stats, your level, your talent points. So here is where everything that you've collected in the PvE or the PvP of the game transfers over, so you can get an advantage over other players. However, that is balanced by the sheer number of players fighting, because if you're being attacked by 10 players, doesn't matter how good your gear is, you're probably going to lose. Then there's the PvE side of things, and there's something called fractals. And fractals I still have not fully grasped, but fractals acts a lot like Mythic Plus of this game. They're little trial dungeons where you and a group of 5 people run through and push levels in that fractal, which increase in difficulty per level to, I believe, level 100. And then you get a fractal upgrade system where you can upgrade your gear in those fractals to do more damage, to have better stats, so that you can handle those higher level fractals. However, that upgrade system only applies to fractals. So when you leave the fractal and go into the open world or go into PvP, the fractal gear that you have does not apply. It does not increase your stats there, but it gives you that vertical progression that you're looking for in this game instead of the classic horizontal progression. This is where I was very wrong, as I thought the entire game was horizontal progression, but this is where you get your vertical progression. Then you also have raids and strikes, which I have not stepped into or done yet. And one of the main reasons I haven't got into raids or strikes is because of how confusing they make this end game. They add so many different currencies and so many different vendors and so many different ways to progress your character that you don't really know what you're looking at half the time, and it doesn't go out of its way to explain anything. A lot of times you're using a wiki or some outside source to explain to you roughly what you need to do to get into these zones or these game types. But even those fall short because they are just overloading you with information, because there's just so much that you have to do just to be competitive in any of these game types. And that is a big letdown. However, once you decide on the game type that you like to play the most, and you actually sit there and commit and learn how to progress or how to get into that game type and be good at that game type, there is a lot to love here. It is so much fun. And that seems to be the priority. How can we make our game more fun? And Guild Wars 2 exceeds in that. But the barrier to entry is probably the shittiest barrier to entry of any MMO I've ever played.
The match starts soon.
I was completely wrong about this game, and I can't stop playing this game because this game is a theme park MMO, but it offers more player freedom than any other MMO out there right now. There is just so much that you can do in this game, with the biggest caveat that it has too many currencies and has too much that gives the player to sort through and try and figure out. If you're looking for a game where you could just hop in and do a bunch of PvP, this is the game to play. This game offers the best PvP experience of any MMO that I've played in at least recent memory. I am having so much fun trying different builds, coming up with my own builds, and just having fun. I'm just having so much fun with this game. The only issue, very rarely have I ever communicated with anybody in this game. I don't need to jump on and talk to people. I could just jump on, queue up, and kill people. With everything that it does, it has blown me away. And I highly recommend you jumping into it and actually committing to learning some of the systems that you want to play in Guild Wars 2. I don't see a world where it would be a negative for you to even try it out. That's all I got for you. See ya.